You wake up one morning, grab your coffee, and look out your window to see some middle-aged woman in yoga pants and a live laugh love tank top standing next to your vehicle with bolt cutters. She's not just looking at your ride, she's actively cutting the chain you use to secure it. And when you run outside screaming, "What the hell are you doing?" she doesn't even flinch. Instead, she pulls out a crumpled piece of paper and waves it in your face like it's some kind of magical document. "This vehicle is in violation of HOA regulations," she announces with the confidence of someone who thinks a clipboard makes them a federal agent. "I'm impounding it." Now here's where it gets really good. The vehicle she's trying to impound? It's not just any old car, it's a modified Jeep Wrangler that belongs to a multi-jurisdictional police task force. And the person she's doing this to? Yeah, that would be Detective Mike Rodriguez, who at that exact moment is standing there in his boxers wondering if he's having some kind of fever dream. But wait, it gets so much worse. Welcome back to HOA Hustle, where we dive deep into the suburban hellscape of power-hungry board members, ridiculous regulations, and homeowners who've had enough. I'm your host, and today we're talking about what happens when an HOA Karen picks the absolute worst possible target for her reign of terror. This is the story of Detective Mike Rodriguez, the Sunset Ridge HOA, and a woman named Brenda Hutchins who thought she could just steal a police vehicle. Because apparently, when you get elected to an HOA board, basic common sense gets surgically removed. So grab your favorite beverage, get comfortable, and let me tell you about the day an HOA tried to go to war with law enforcement. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for the HOA. Let's set the stage. Sunset Ridge is one of those planned communities in Arizona. You know the type. Perfect lawns, beige houses, and enough CCRs to choke a horse. Every mailbox is the same height, every driveway the same shade of concrete gray, and God help you if your grass grows half an inch too tall. Detective Mike Rodriguez moved into Sunset Ridge in 2019. Good guy, been on the force for 12 years, works with a multi-jurisdictional drug task force that covers 3 counties. Mike's the kind of cop who actually gives a damn, coaches Little League on weekends, helps elderly neighbors with their groceries, and has never once complained about the HOA's obsession with lawn maintenance. Mike's job requires him to drive different vehicles depending on the operation. Sometimes it's an unmarked sedan, sometimes a surveillance van, and sometimes, like in our story, it's a modified Jeep Wrangler that's been outfitted for undercover work in rural areas. This Jeep isn't your average soccer mom mobile. We're talking lifted suspension, aggressive tires, light bar, winch, the works. But here's the thing. It's completely legal, properly registered, and belongs to the police department. Mike doesn't own it, he's just assigned to it for specific operations. Now Mike knows the HOA has rules about vehicles. The CCRs are pretty standard. No commercial vehicles, no RVs, no boats, no cars on blocks. Makes sense, right? Keep the neighborhood looking nice. Mike's personal truck fits all the guidelines, and when he occasionally has to bring the work Jeep home overnight between operations, he parks it in his driveway just like any other resident. Enter Brenda Hutchins. Brenda is the HOA president, and she takes her job very seriously. We're talking about a woman who measures grass length with an actual ruler, who has called code enforcement on neighbors for having the wrong shade of beige on their house trim, who once tried to fine someone for having a basketball hoop that was aesthetically displeasing. Brenda has been president for 4 years, and in that time, she's turned what used to be a pretty chill neighborhood into a suburban police state. She's got a whole network of volunteer compliance officers, basically other board retirees who walk around with clipboards looking for violations. The first time Brenda sees Mike's work Jeep, she immediately decides it doesn't belong. Never mind that it's a normal vehicle parked in a resident's driveway. Never mind that she has no idea who it belongs to or why it's there. In Brenda's mind, that Jeep is too rugged, too masculine, too different from the cookie-cutter SUVs and sedans that fill the other driveways. So she does what any reasonable HOA president would do. She starts building a case. Brenda begins documenting every time the Jeep appears. Photos from her iPhone, notes about dates and times, measurements of how far it extends past the garage door. She's treating this like she's gathering evidence for a murder trial, not dealing with a resident parking their vehicle at their own house. After 2 weeks of surveillance, and I use that term loosely because Brenda has the subtlety of a marching band, she decides she has enough evidence to act. She drafts a violation notice citing oversized recreational vehicle and non-conforming automotive modification and drops it in Mike's mailbox. Mike gets home from a 14-hour shift, finds the notice, and honestly, he laughs. He figures there's been some kind of misunderstanding. The Jeep isn't oversized, it's not recreational, and while it's modified, those modifications were done by the police department for official use. So Mike does what any reasonable person would do. He calls the HOA office to explain. Big mistake. The conversation between Mike and Brenda goes about as well as you'd expect. Mike explains that he's a police detective, the Jeep belongs to his department. And it's only parked there occasionally for work purposes. He's polite, professional, and assumes this clears everything up. Brenda's response? I don't care if you're the President of the United States. The rules are the rules. Now, Mike's dealt with difficult people before. It comes with the job. But there's something about Brenda's tone that immediately puts him on edge. She's not just enforcing rules, she's drunk on power. And when Mike tries to explain that police vehicles are generally exempt from most parking restrictions, Brenda drops this gem. Show me where it says that in our rules. Our rules, like the HOA CCRs, are some kind of constitutional document that supersedes state and federal law. Mike keeps his cool and explains that he'll be happy to provide documentation from his department if needed. Brenda says that won't be necessary because she's already decided the Jeep has to go. Remove it within 48 hours or face daily fines of $100, she tells him. Mike hangs up and immediately calls his sergeant. Sarge has dealt with HOA issues before and gives Mike the contact info for the department's legal counsel. Within 2 hours, the HOA receives a formal letter explaining that the vehicle belongs to law enforcement and is exempt from their restrictions under state statute. Most reasonable people would back down at this point, but Brenda isn't most people. Instead of acknowledging the letter, Brenda doubles down. She calls an emergency board meeting and convinces the other members that this is about protecting property values and preventing a dangerous precedent. What if every resident starts claiming they need military-style vehicles for work? What's next? Tanks in the driveways. The board, 3 other retirees who are just as bored and power-hungry as Brenda, votes to uphold the violation. They send Mike another letter, this time threatening legal action if the vehicle isn't removed. Mike's getting frustrated now. He's trying to do his job, which sometimes involves bringing work vehicles home. He's provided legal documentation proving the vehicle's exemption, and instead of backing down, these people are threatening to sue him. But here's where Brenda makes her first major tactical error. She starts involving the neighbors. Brenda begins a door-to-door campaign telling anyone who'll listen about the dangerous military vehicle parked in their peaceful neighborhood. She shows them the photos she's been taking, talks about how property values will plummet, and hints that Mike might be some kind of survivalist extremist. The problem with this strategy? Mike is actually well-liked in the neighborhood. His neighbors know he's a cop. They've seen him leave for work in a suit and tie. Their kids trick-or-treat at his house every Halloween. When Brenda starts spreading her conspiracy theories, most people just think she's lost her mind. But a few neighbors do get worried, not about Mike, but about Brenda. They start asking questions. Why is she photographing residents' vehicles? Why is she so obsessed with this one cop? And why won't she just accept the legal documentation and move on? Word gets back to Mike that Brenda is essentially conducting surveillance on his house and spreading rumors about him. Now, it's not just about a parking violation, it's harassment. Mike documents everything: the photos Brenda's been taking, the rumors she's spreading, the pattern of escalating behavior. He files a complaint with local police about stalking and harassment. Nothing criminal yet, but it establishes a paper trail. That's when Brenda decides to escalate to DEFCON 1. She discovers that Mike has been chaining the Jeep to a tree in his yard when it's parked there overnight. This is standard procedure for high-value police equipment, prevents theft and tampering. But in Brenda's mind, this chain is another violation, unsightly security devices or some bullshit like that. So Brenda comes up with a plan that's so insane, so completely detached from reality, that it's almost impressive in its stupidity. If Mike won't remove the Jeep voluntarily, and if the legal system won't back her up, then she'll just have to remove it herself. She researches vehicle impoundment laws, convinced that as HOA president, she has some kind of authority to seize non-compliant vehicles. Spoiler alert, she doesn't. But that doesn't stop Brenda from ordering a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters online and planning what she calls enforcement action. She tells the other board members she's going to impound the vehicle and store it at a local towing company until Mike pays his fines and agrees to comply with HOA rules. The other board members are horrified. They try to talk her out of it, but Brenda is convinced she's legally in the right. She's spent weeks researching property management law and has convinced herself that HOA presidents have broad authority to enforce compliance. She doesn't research what happens when you steal a police vehicle. That never occurred to her. It's a Tuesday morning in July when Brenda makes her move. Mike's been working a surveillance operation that ran until 3 a.m., so he's dead asleep when Brenda creeps into his yard with her bolt cutters at 7:30 in the morning. The sound of metal being cut wakes him up immediately. Mike's been a cop long enough to know the sound of criminal activity, and his first instinct is that someone's trying to steal his vehicle. He grabs his service weapon and his badge and runs outside in his boxers. That's when he sees Brenda, bolt cutters in hand, standing next to his partially severed security chain, like she's some kind of suburban vigilante. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle," Mike shouts, not immediately recognizing her. Brenda looks up with this expression of righteous indignation. "I'm seizing this vehicle for HOA violations. You've been warned multiple times." Mike stares at her for a full 10 seconds, trying to process what he's hearing. Then it clicks. This is Brenda, the HOA president, and she's actively committing several felonies while standing in his front yard. "Ma'am, you need to put down the bolt cutters and step back. You're committing theft of government property." But Brenda isn't backing down. She pulls out her phone and starts recording, convinced she's documenting some kind of police brutality or corruption. In her mind, Mike is the bad guy here, and she's the hero standing up for neighborhood property values. "I'm within my rights as HOA president," she announces to her phone camera. "This resident has repeatedly refused to comply with our vehicle regulations, and I'm exercising our authority to impound non-compliant vehicles." Mike is now fully awake and completely incredulous. This woman just confessed to multiple felonies while filming herself. She's holding bolt cutters next to a damaged security chain, and she's claiming authority she absolutely does not have. "Ma'am, you do not have impoundment authority. You are currently committing theft, destruction of property, and trespassing. I'm ordering you to cease and desist immediately." Brenda's response? "I don't take orders. S from residents who violate our rules." That's when Mike decides this has gone far enough. He calls 911 and reports a theft in progress, providing his badge number and explaining that someone is attempting to steal a police vehicle. Then he calls his sergeant to give him a heads up about the clusterfuck that's about to hit the department. Within 5 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrive. The officers immediately recognize the Jeep. They've seen it at the station, and they know Mike from task force operations. They also immediately recognize what's happening. Some civilian is trying to steal police property while claiming HOA authority. Brenda, meanwhile, is still filming and still convinced she's in the right. When the patrol officers approach her, she explains that she's the HOA president and she's seizing a non-compliant vehicle. She shows them her violation notices, her documentation photos, her research into impoundment law. The officers look at each other like they can't believe what they're hearing. "Ma'am," one of them says, "you just admitted to attempting to steal a police vehicle. That's a felony." "It's not stealing," Brenda insists. "It's enforcement action." That's when they arrest her. Brenda Hutchins, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood compliance officer, gets handcuffed in Mike's front yard while half the neighborhood watches from their windows. She's charged with attempted theft of government property, destruction of property, trespassing, and harassment. But the real kicker? The whole thing is caught on her own phone, which she dropped when they cuffed her. Her confession, her destruction of property, her complete disregard for actual law, it's all recorded in 4K video. Mike retrieves the phone as evidence, and when he watches the footage later, he can't help but laugh. Brenda literally filmed herself committing multiple felonies while explains, ironing her reasoning in detail. It's like she was making a training video for how not to be an HOA president. The arrest makes the local news that evening. HOA president arrested for attempting to steal police vehicle is the kind of headline that writes itself, but that's just the beginning of Brenda's problems. News of Brenda's arrest spreads through Sunset Ridge like wildfire. Within hours, every resident knows that their HOA president tried to steal a cop's car and filmed herself doing it. The video gets leaked to social media, and by the next morning, Brenda's become a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. The comments are brutal. People are calling her everything from Karen Supreme to HOA Hitler. The video gets picked up by national news outlets as an example of HOA overreach gone completely insane. Late-night talk show hosts are making jokes about suburban vigilantes with bolt cutters. But the real fallout is happening within the HOA itself. The other board members are in full panic mode. They're getting calls from residents demanding explanations, from lawyers offering to sue the HOA, from journalists wanting interviews. Property management companies are distancing themselves. Insurance carriers are asking very uncomfortable questions. The HOA's lawyer, a guy who usually handles routine compliance issues and contract disputes, suddenly finds himself dealing with criminal charges, potential federal civil rights violations, and a public relations nightmare that's spiraling out of control. He immediately calls an emergency meeting and delivers some hard truths. Brenda has to resign, the HOA needs to settle with Mike immediately, and they need to implement major policy changes to prevent this kind of catastrophe from happening again. But here's the thing about people like Brenda. They don't go quietly, even after being arrested, even after becoming a national laughingstock, even after her own lawyer tells her she's completely screwed. Brenda still thinks she's in the right. She posts on social media about being persecuted for enforcing community standards. She gives interviews to local news claiming she's the victim of police intimidation. She starts a GoFundMe to pay her legal bills, calling herself a defender of property rights. The GoFundMe raises exactly $37. Meanwhile, Mike is dealing with his own media circus. Reporters want interviews about the crazy HOA lady who tried to steal your car. His department gets calls from other law enforcement agencies sharing their own HOA horror stories. The video of Brenda with the bolt cutters becomes required viewing at police academy training sessions about dealing with difficult civilians. But Mike handles it all with remarkable grace. He gives one interview to local news, explains the situation calmly and professionally, and emphasizes that most HOA disputes don't involve attempted theft of police vehicles. He even shows a bit of sympathy for residents who are dealing with overzealous HOA boards. "Look," he says, "most HOA board members are just trying to maintain property values and keep their neighborhoods nice. This situation was an extreme outlier involving someone who completely lost perspective on their actual authority." The contrast between Mike's professionalism and Brenda's unhinged social media rants couldn't be more stark. One guy comes across as reasonable and measured, the other looks like she needs professional help. The legal consequences start piling up fast. Brenda's criminal charges are serious. Attempted theft of government property is a federal offense. Her lawyer tries to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor isn't interested in going easy on someone who filmed themselves committing felonies while claiming made-up authority. The HOA's insurance company denies coverage for Brenda's actions, arguing that attempting to steal vehicles falls well outside their liability coverage. So when Mike files a civil lawsuit for harassment, stalking, and violation of his civil rights, the HOA is looking at paying damages out of their own pocket. Property values in Sunset Ridge actually do take a hit, not because of Mike's Jeep, but because national news coverage makes the HOA look like it's run by lunatics. Real estate agents start having to explain to potential buyers that the board member who tried to steal a police car is no longer involved. The other board members resign en masse. They're embarrassed, they're facing potential personal liability, and they want nothing more to do with an organization that's become synonymous with suburban insanity. Within 6 weeks of Brenda's arrest, the entire HOA board has collapsed, the management company has terminated their contract, and residents are calling for a complete restructuring of the organization. But the absolute best part? 3 days after her arrest, Brenda gets a $50 fine in the mail for having an unsightly storage container in her yard. Turns out someone reported the bolt cutters she left sitting on her patio after being released on bail. The fine came from the County Code Enforcement Office, not the HOA, but the irony is absolutely perfect. Brenda's criminal case goes to trial 4 months later, and it's exactly as much of a disaster as you'd expect. Her defense attorney tries to argue that she genuinely believed she had authority to impound the vehicle, but the prosecution just plays her confession video over and over again. The jury deliberates for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. She gets sentenced to 6 months in county jail, 2 years probation, community service, and restitution for the damaged security chain. The judge, who's clearly had enough of HOA-related nonsense in his courtroom, delivers a scathing lecture about the difference between neighborhood rules and actual law. "Ma'am," he says, "being elected to an HOA board does not make you a law enforcement officer, a federal agent, or anything other than a volunteer responsible for maintaining common areas and enforcing reasonable community standards. Your actions were not just illegal, they were dangerous and completely divorced from reality." The civil lawsuit settles for an undisclosed amount, but sources close to the case suggest it was significant enough to require the HOA to take out a loan against their reserve funds. Mike donates most of the settlement to a legal aid organization that helps homeowners fight abusive HOA practices. Sunset Ridge gets new management, a new board, and completely rewritten CCRs that include explicit protections for law enforcement vehicles, emergency responders, and reasonable occupational requirements. They also implement mandatory training for all board members about their actual legal authority, which, it turns out, is much more limited than people like Brenda think. Mike still lives in the neighborhood, his work Jeep still gets parked in his driveway when needed, and nobody, absolutely nobody, has bothered him about it since. The new HOA president is a retired teacher who actually reads the law before making decisions. Property values have recovered. The neighborhood has returned to being a reasonably pleasant place to live. As for Brenda, after serving her jail time, she moved to a different state. Word is she tried to join another HOA board but was rejected after a background check revealed her felony convictions. She occasionally pops up on social media with rants about corrupt police and HOA persecution, but mostly she's faded into well-deserved obscurity. The bolt cutters got donated to a local trade school where they're used to teach students about proper tool safety, because unlike Brenda, those students actually learn about the appropriate use of their equipment. Mike frames a photo from the local newspaper showing Brenda in handcuffs next to his Jeep. It hangs in his garage with a small plaque that reads, "Some people think being on an HOA board makes them a cop. They're wrong." The whole incident has become something of a legend in law enforcement circles. Police academies use it as a training example of how to handle civilians who think they have more authority than they actually do. The key lesson? Stay professional, document everything, and let people like Brenda incriminate themselves, which in this case, she literally did. So there you have it, the saga of Brenda Hutchins, the HOA president who thought she could steal a police car and call it enforcement action. It's a story that has everything: suburban drama, criminal stupidity, and the most satisfying arrest video you'll ever see. But here's what really gets me about this whole situation. Brenda had multiple opportunities to back down. When Mike explained he was a cop, when the department sent legal documentation, when her own board members told her she was going too far, when her lawyer probably screamed at her to stop talking to reporters. At every step she could have said, "You know what? Maybe I overreacted. Maybe enforcing lawn care standards doesn't actually require bolt cutters and vigilante justice." Stouts. Ted, she doubled down at every opportunity until she ended up in handcuffs on national television, explaining to a judge why she thought HOA presidency came with impoundment powers. The lesson here isn't just about HOA overreach, though that's definitely part of it. It's about what happens when people get a tiny bit of authority and completely lose their minds. When they start thinking that being elected to manage a neighborhood swimming pool makes them some kind of federal agent. And honestly, good for Mike for handling it the way he did. He stayed professional, followed proper procedures, and let the system work. He could have handled this very differently, and probably legally, but he chose the high road. What do you think? Have you ever dealt with an HOA board member who thought they had more power than they actually did? Ever seen someone take neighborhood enforcement to completely insane levels? Drop your stories in the comments, and please tell me they involve fewer felonies than Brenda's approach. If you enjoyed this deep dive into suburban insanity, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA horror stories. And if you know someone who's dealing with an overzealous HOA board, maybe share this video as a cautionary tale about what happens when community standards meet criminal stupidity. Until next time, remember, just because you have a clipboard doesn't mean you have authority, and bolt cutters are definitely not approved HOA enforcement tools. Stay safe out there and keep your property values high and your felony charges low.